Hello, this is Gloomy Sunday, and once again, I will be sharing a spooky story that will send shivers down your spine. I will be sharing 2 spooky stories tonight. Without further ado, let me tell you the first one. My dad was a soldier in the Gulf War, so he was away from home a lot. As expected of a proper Asian wife, my mom lived and farmed with Dad's family in the Philippines. Dad's older brother and sister-in-law had an autistic son, whom we will call Bobby, who doesn't know how to talk or walk properly. Even though he's already around 7 or 8 years old, he still crawls. My mom adored Bobby and gives him the attention that his parents never gave him, so he was very attached to her. One of the games they would play is the tickling game, where you'd put your finger on your lips and blubber, then take that finger while still blubbering your lips and tickle the other person. I'm sure you guys have done this with your little ones to show affection or make them laugh. Most days, some of the family members will go to the garden while my mom or grandparents stayed home to watch Bobby and tend to the animals and housework. But the weeds were growing faster than they could manage to clear, so my aunt and uncle decided that they need every able person in the family to go and help for 1 or 2 days. They didn't want to bring Bobby along because he would need a lot of attention and distract them from all the work that needed to be done. They are already behind schedule. They decided that they will do something to make sure Bobby doesn't wander around. It was a cold morning. My aunt and uncle tied a rope on one of Bobby's foot and tied the other end to the middle post of the house, next to the stove that was still burning with firewood, supposedly to keep him warm. Bobby cried and wanted to go along with everyone too. He didn't want to be left alone. He was able to free himself and crawled after them, but they brought him back and tied his foot to the post again. Finally, Bobby curled up into a ball and lay there by the burning stove. My mother felt bad about this, but she wouldn't dare go against the wishes of her in-laws. She just kissed Bobby on the forehead and promised him that they will be back soon. Tragedy struck, and it was not exactly known how it started, but the house caught on fire while the whole family was still at the garden. A neighbor had to run to the garden to fetch them. My aunt, uncle, and grandparents all rushed home. My mom and the other children had to gather their belongings before leaving the garden. When they got to the edge of the village, they can see a dark cloud of smoke in the sky coming from the direction of where they lived. As they got closer, they can see that all the villagers were still trying to help put out the fire. Bobby, his foot still tied to the middle post of the house, laid there. He was already charred black by the time they finally put out the fire. My mother sobbed so hard she thought her heart will break. She couldn't believe that her sweet and good-natured nephew died such a horrible death. My mom could not bear to look at him after my aunt and grandma put his funeral clothes on him. He smelled of rot and burned skin, blood oozing out of his body. She had never in her life seen a dead, burnt person before. Because she was so terrified and traumatized, she couldn't go say goodbye to him or see him at the casket during the whole funeral. But when they took his body to go and bury it in the ground, while they walked out the door, my mom happened to be in the way, so she stepped aside and caught a glimpse of him. She thought she saw him, opened his eyes and smiled at her. Soon after the burial, while my mom slept in the middle of the night, in her dream-wake state, she would have the creepiest experience of her life. A no-face creature with arms and legs out like a spider would crawl on 4s from the ground and onto the wall closest to my mom, then it would sit on her chest and pin her down. Then it would take its finger and tickle her while blubbering its lips. It didn't always come, but some nights, it would come. It followed her throughout for years throughout the war, haunting her at night. She told my grandparents, aunt, and uncle, and even my dad, but no one believed her. They thought that she was just imagining things because she was so shocked by the terrible death of her beloved nephew. My mom told my dad that the creature would always play the tickling game that she played with Bobby. She believes it's him. Finally, my dad asked a faith healer to look into it, and the healer told him that it is indeed Bobby. He was so attached to my mom because he sees her as someone who loved him like a son. He was sad that she didn't try to stop everyone from leaving him at home that day. That's why even after he died, he kept coming back to play the tickling game with her. The faith healer did a big ceremonial ritual to cut his path and send him off so that he would not be able to find his way back to her and play the tickling game to her. And to this day, she still regrets not standing up for him and being too obedient to her in-laws. This second story is another true, sad, and heartbreaking account that came from Thailand. It was 1984 and my mother already had 2 daughters, my older sisters. She then gave birth to her 3rd child, my brother. We will call him James. James was very handsome according to my parents. He had white skin, red lips, and thick black hair the color of midnight. He was healthy, happy, and everything seemed perfect. But about a year into his short-lived life, he got really sick. My parents said he was almost walking at almost 1 year old. He got sick so fast and sadly soon passed. My parents won't tell us if they sought the help of a faith healer to find the cause of death or not. It seems like it was too much for them to go into details. Anyway, my parents remembered he was still as beautiful as a corpse, as if he was still alive. My mom said her heart cried for the heavens and earth. Her tears burned her eyes. Her body was numb and weak. She said her world shattered after seeing her child in the custom corpse outfit, laying there lifeless. My father and her family refused to let her cry to the dead my brother. According to our customs, it's a bad omen to cry and cling on to a deceased young human being, so my mom said she cried silently in her heart. They quickly did the custom funeral for my brother and buried him. He was buried in a deserted forest off the daily trail my parents and many villagers took to the garden. After burying him, my mother missed him every day, every hour, and every second. She would go visit him a few times a week by herself. She would go and pull out weeds around his grave and clean his grave a bit. My father started noticing that she was visiting too often. He and her side of the family encouraged her that it was not a good idea, that a young human who has passed so short after death is nothing but evil after death. For their spirit hasn't been accepted into the family tree spiritually. My mother insisted she would stop visiting my brother so often. This is the scary and very sad part. One day, my mother decided that since she already finished her work for the day, she would go visit my brother and clean his grave. She said his grave was surrounded by tall trees and was in a little meadow-type field. The trees surrounded him like a circle barrier. Far off in the distance, there was a 24-inch bush not far from my brother's grave. As my mom approached my brother's grave, she was overcome with emotions, and she started crying. She cried her heart out and hoped the heavens heard and felt her pain. She said she must have cried for about 20 minutes when all of a sudden, in the distance by the little bush tree, she heard a little bird, making a noise almost like a human voice. It said, "Don't cry, don't cry." My mother raised her head up and looked around but saw no one. She said the hair on her neck and arms stood right up. Her tears still ran down her cheeks. The little voice from the distance near the little bush resurfaced. "Don't cry, don't cry." My mom answered back a few words. "I won't cry anymore, my son. This will be my last visit. I'm sorry I come and cry for you every day. I miss you. You stayed with me for such a short amount of time that my heart isn't healing from your birth up until your death. I will not come anymore. Don't cry and wait for me anymore. I will miss you forever." And with that, my mom got up and wiped her tears and took one look at my brother's grave. She proceeded to head back on the main trail home. She said as she started walking away from the grave, the little bird voice started chirping like it was crying. She didn't want to look back because she didn't want to see what was watching her leave for the last time. She said the chirping was still going on until she reached the trail and she still heard it in the distance. She said her heart ached with pain because she knew that was the final goodbye. Whoever was there after that visit was not going to be my brother anymore. She reached the village where she ran into my dad's arms and cried. She finally calmed down and told him the story. He forbade her to go near that site anymore. He said her spirit is weak and vulnerable to the unseen. My dad told her it was not her son anymore in that grave. He was on the other side. What was roaming the place were the evil spirits who couldn't find its way. My mom said she found the courage to pick up her heart and cover her pain. She never went back there. My parents soon came to the US and had a few more kids. My mom still dreams of my brother and her walking the trail. In her dream, she would see him looking about 1 to 2 years old, walking around naked in the forest or sighting on a log up ahead on the trail waiting for her. She's frightened by the dreams, but she still has a soft spot for my brother. I can see her pain when she talks about him. There is nothing stronger than a mother's love for her child even in death. I hope you enjoyed our spooky story. Join us next time for another spooky story.